Thomas Alva Edison. He was a 19th century inventor who reportedly took over 1,000 attempts to make the world's first light bulb. This is a statue of Walt Disney. Before he came to create the parks and movies we know and love today, he was a high school dropout who was rejected from the army and fired from his first job for not being creative enough. This is J.K. Rowling. Her manuscript for the first Harry Potter book was rejected a total of 12 times from various publishing companies. On top of that, she struggled with depression as a single mother for years. This one's me! So, I have yet to see the same levels of success that they have, but I'd say that being here on stage today is a good place to start. So, all of these individuals have something in common, despite their many differences. And I want you to think for a moment about what that might be. All of these individuals have faced failures of the most severe kind throughout their life, all across the spectrum. I am someone who fails every single day, without fail. I think if I made a list of the number of times I've failed, it would probably be a mile long. It's very extensive. And despite that, I still have trouble accepting that throughout my life. According to a study by Douglas Vermeeren, up to 20% of the population that fails, that sets goals, 30% of them tend to succeed, whereas the remaining 70% feel this sort of feeling of inadequacy when they fail. They feel as though they aren't meant to succeed, or that they've already spent their options. And this simply isn't true. But what is failure exactly? Well, people typically define it as a lack of success, but the roots of it go so much deeper. Think of failure as a drug. It has its positive side effects and its negative ones. When the negative ones outweigh the positives, people have the tendency to decide not to take that medicine, and it can have detrimental effects. So essentially, think of failure as something that has these negative side effects that people are consistently afraid of. So, I've seen this in lots of cases, across all fields, but the case I've seen this most is around my peers, whether it's in academics or extracurriculars or anything else. And so I think it's great to understand that when you're in this situation, you need to find some way to move on. And I experienced this too. I fell into this sort of pit when I was struggling, when I participated in SeaburyHall's One Acts, as seen up here. So I remember very distinctly when we got our script. But before I tell you about it, let me first explain what One Acts is. So One Acts is essentially this wonderful experience where you get up on stage with a group of 2 to maybe 4 other people, and you present a single act, hence the name One Acts. And before I say anything, I'd like to preface this with, this was one of the best experiences I've ever had on stage. So, here we go again. So, when I saw the script for the first time, I realized that I had a lot more lines than I'd expected. But I wasn't too worried because I figured I have a lot of time to memorize this. I have weeks, so I can memorize and memorize and memorize them. But here's something people don't usually know about me when I try to memorize and memorize and memorize. I'll feel as though, when I get on stage, I'll feel as though I've forgotten all of it within seconds. And so you can imagine how that went over. So I run up on stage. My character's super excited because she found a rich guy's wallet in the parking lot, long story. And I get my lines out really well for a while. I feel great about it, my confidence grows. But then I get to the very first paragraph that I have, of 3, the first one. And I freeze. Because I feel as though I can't remember a single thing. I can't remember a word to save my life. And so I do the one thing you're not supposed to do in front of an audience. I apologize to them. I was absolutely mortified. And it honestly very stressful. But after have it again on the second night. And so one of the girls had this brilliant idea to put the script in a book, because we were set in a college dorm. And so I loved the idea, because I could go over there and sit down, and I could either read over her shoulder, which you open the book, or I could wait for her to prompt me. And I loved that, because it felt foolproof, right? But I didn't want to rely on that. I didn't want to feel as though I needed that to succeed. And so I told myself that when I got home, I was going to memorize and memorize and memorize again in the morning. But when I woke up in the morning, this fearful feeling washed over me, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't find anything to push me forward. The momentum was just gone. And I tried to think for a moment about what was causing this, and I came up with this one question that I kept asking myself. What if I mess up again? Or rather, what if I embarrass myself again? There's that negative side effect I was talking about earlier. In my case, it was embarrassment. I was so worried about embarrassing myself that it completely decimated everything else. And so I kept thinking about it for a while. I was trying to figure out, well, what do I do now? Do I just sit here and wallow in my sorrows? But then I realized it didn't matter. Or rather, it doesn't matter. I realized that as long as I put in the effort to push forward and keep going, then I'd be fine. And so, when I got up on stage later, I did mess up. But I didn't apologize to the audience, which was a relief. And I realized when I got off stage that I had done my best. I felt rewarded. It was a wonderful experience, and I loved it. I loved it so much that this year I'm participating again, and I'm not just acting in it, I'm also writing a script and directing one. So pray for me. So I realized from that experience that as a whole, in order to move forward, I needed to recognize that the effect was much more important than the situation. That push forward was necessary. This was what failures had to be known for. And so, you might be wondering, where on earth does this girl on stage want you to start with that in your own failures? But you may not like the answer. See, in order to improve upon your failures, you need to wait until you fail. Because a hero can't slay a dragon without approaching it first. And so you need to find out a way to start, to press onward and keep pursuing that. This effort to accept the situation and move forward, these 2 points, are what makes failures so necessary. And they're completely reliant on one another. You can't move forward if you don't accept the situation. And you can't accept the situation without moving forward, because it'll turn it into a cycle of regret. And you also need to be completely honest with yourself. You need to take that moment to understand that, yeah, you failed that test, and it's unfortunate, really. But there's nothing you can do about that in the moment. I realized while I was up there acting that in the moment I couldn't fix what had happened. I couldn't take back that apology. But I realized that I could affect the future. And being honest with myself was so important, and it led me to the next point of being kind to myself. I needed to realize that I was still trying, that I was still trying to work harder, and that I was not looking for perfection. I wasn't trying to give them the most perfect thing ever. I was just trying to get through and enjoy it. So, on top of this, there's the effort of trying to move forward. And the major part of this is attempting to not fail. But this attempt is probably futile, because here's why. You are totally going to fail again at some point. It's a very human thing to fail, and if you don't learn that or recognize that, then you'll go back into that cycle of regret that I was talking about. You won't be able to move forward. And another thing that really curbs your attempts to keep going or to move forward is comparing yourself. It's so detrimental. And I There's nothing wrong with you that you aren't meeting that bar, because that bar isn't there for you. That bar is here. And while you may be here, it's more realistic to shoot for what's realistic for you. So shooting for a goal that is not your own will not work out. It's also completely necessary to set reasonable goals for yourself. Try your best not to fall as victims did. Try to set goals that are not too high or too low. It's best to find the midpoint between the two. It's also a great idea to talk to somebody, to find someone who will hold you accountable for your mistakes, or your points, or your efforts to move forward. Let's say you tell your teacher or your friend that you're going to get an A on that next test. You will suddenly feel as though you're being held accountable by this person or this effort, and so you'll feel much more secure in your efforts to move forward. It's also a wonderful idea to set up a reward system for yourself. So I saw this post the other day where this person was struggling to get through a textbook chapter. They just couldn't do it. And so they took a pack of M&Ms, and they would put an M&M on the page. And every time they got through the page and understood it, they would eat the M&M and move on. And they kept doing it until they got through the pages. So, I would like for all of you to take a leaf out of the book of someone who fails very frequently, to keep going in the wake of failure and not dwell on those negative effects. Without this decision to keep moving forward, we wouldn't have the light bulb as we know it, or the Disney parks and movies, or the Harry Potter books. All those individuals made that decision to keep going and ignore failure. So, next time you're on stage trying to improve a situation, or you're trying to invent something, but you've tried 1,000 times and it's not working, I encourage you to keep going and find some way to improve. To follow the point made in Disney's Meet the Robinsons and keep moving forward.